And we live. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Modern Enterprise Architecture Meetup that brought to you by FromHereOn and EA Learning. So today's topic is service design and enterprise architecture, contradictory or complementary. Good afternoon to those of you in Australia and New Zealand, and good morning to our viewers in UK, if everyone awake. And please introduce yourselves in the comments and let us know where you're watching us from today. I'm Jana Martins, talent and community lead at From Here On, and I'll be your host today. In today's discussion, we explore the intersection of service design and enterprise architecture. Our expert panel will dive deep into debate, exploring whether these approaches are in conflict or can work together to drive innovation and success. So, yeah, we'll discuss what works, what doesn't, and common pitfalls. Please, again, join our discussion with your questions and comments, or at least say hi in the comments, because if you're not saying hi, we don't know that you're here. So say hi in the comments. We are live today on both From Here On and EA Learning channel. Doesn't matter where you're watching us, make sure to introduce yourself. So we are running these discussions monthly, and I will announce our upcoming topic later. And our purpose is to create a space for architectural thinkers to connect and share information and to build an informal community where members can explore diverse ideas. And also we have some face-to-face events coming up soon, so make sure to stay tuned. And without further delay, let's pass it on to our speakers to introduce themselves. We'll start with Stuart, please.
Hi, good morning. So good morning from London. It's I think 6 a.m. Stuart Alexander here. I work at AXA Insurance. I head up business design in our retail business in the UK. And I guess historically, I've held positions of enterprise architect at a number of large firms, and sort of sit squarely in on I guess the more business strategy side. Of business architecture and design today. And I guess quite a lot of experience sort of observing how service design, we'll kind of get onto what we think that means in a minute, intersects with enterprise architecture, and how it can be, in my view, probably more, just putting out there, more complementary than contradictory, but with some hurdles to get over. But maybe I'll hand over to Morgen. Is that okay, Anna?
Yes, please, Morgan, over to you.
Thanks, Stuart. So hello, everybody. My name is Morgen Carson. I have had the pleasure of working with From Here On for a while, but I'm currently actually working for a fabulous company called Syncfish. I am the head of customer and professional services for them. My background is many and varied. I have a strangely curious combination of the end user experience, human centered design, creative side, but also the back end IT technical side. So I think I've got an interesting perspective on that fusion between service design and enterprise architecture. And that's certainly been my experience working with architects and service designers before. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion and lively debate, because I too agree with Stuart. I think there's great synergies between the two of them. But I'd love to hand over to Alexis to introduce himself.
Thanks, Morgan. Good to be here. So I'm Alexis. I'm a director at FromHereOn. I'm looking after the business transformation practice, so helping organization to align, design, and activate change to be more digital and customer-centric. And I guess what that involves a lot is bringing together architecture, service design, and modern ways of working. So quite keen to be into that conversation. I had a chance to be involved in some large-scale transformation and some of those with Stuart and Morgan. So good to cross path again, mostly in financial services, but a bit in the public and not-for-profits. And before that, I spent some time with some software startups. So I got to experience architecture in the large-scale structured environment, but also more of the service design, agile in the startup world. And yeah, quite interesting to see how those disciplines come together these days. And I think without giving too much away, I see this probably as complementary, but with a bit of friction that can be solved.
Thank you, everyone. So I guess before we, kind of dive into comparing, like if it's complementary or in conflict, let's just maybe define a little bit what is service design. Let's assume that majority of people who are watching us knows what enterprise architecture, because it's an enterprise architecture group. But let's maybe give some examples. What is service design, and how would you define how do you define it, and can you maybe provide some example of service design and organization? And then we'll look at the intersection after. So, Stuart, maybe let's start with you again. What is the service design for you?
Well, I'd like to start, I guess, by saying what it's not, because for a lot of people that are watching on from an IT background or from an enterprise architecture background, I think it's important to say, like, we would know the concept of service design as part of an ITIL process, or service introduction and service design. And when we for the rest of this conversation, when we're talking about service design, it's sort of partly the design of a service that you might expect to see in a service design document that describes what a service is, how the service works, what its uptime is, what its recovery time is, all of this sort of service resilience, like you'd expect to see a service designer in the context that we're discussing today document and describe these things. But when we're talking about service design, we're actually talking about something kind of a little bit broader, a little bit more strategic. And so when we're talking about service design, put to one side your notions of ITIL service design. We're talking about a practice and a discipline that is very human-centered, that is multidisciplinary in nature, and that's trying to solve effectively design services that meet ultimately end user and customer needs, and that deeply kind of are designed to sort of tap into latent needs, kind of core consumer needs, customer needs, and design services that effectively engage and deliver business outcomes. So that could be balancing desirability and viability and feasibility. And so to get to that point, service designers and the practice of service design would typically involve a lot of research, human-centered research, drawing upon maybe techniques such as ethnography, so kind of observing people, users in the real world, how are they interacting to try and discover insights, looking at large data sets, therefore kind of needing to kind of brush up on their data skills, drawing from influence from other industries, bringing together different groups of people to really try and get to the heart and essence of what is the actual design problem here at the core of this this challenge that we're working on, which is effectively in the context of a product or a service, and then prototyping, iterating different ideas to try and design services in very lightweight ways, very quickly to get fast feedback loops, to ultimately then go and build and deliver services that, I guess, balance that kind of cost and efficiency, but at the same time delighting in the moments that matter. So maybe Morgan, you want to kind of layer in a little bit more over the top of what I've kind of maybe laid out as a bit of a sketch. Is that?
It resonates.
That's
It really does. And I think, speaking personally, I came to service design the long way around. So even though I had a creative background, so when I did an IT degree, but I majored in multimedia, so I had both of those kind of facets, and understood the infrastructure and networking and programming and databases and technical aspects of IT. But I also had the design, games design, and imagery and so many other concepts in the creative space. But most of my career, that's why what you said about it coming from an ITIL perspective, Stuart, that really resonates with me, because I implemented process improvements and services from an ITSM perspective. So a lot of the work that I did early in my career and mid in my career was about taking processes businesses did to fulfill customer needs. So maybe HR teams or IT teams or facilities management teams, process map them, put them into a tool like ServiceNow, and forced upon end users to interact with those forms and submit them. And throughout my journey in my career, exactly, Stuart, I was thinking about these things purely from a process perspective, purely from an ITIL or an ITSM process perspective, so IT service management for the non-IT people around. And it wasn't until we started getting feedback from our end users that the forms themselves might have been approachable, but they had little visibility over the processes or little visibility over the user experience. And I always make a joke that for almost like penance for my sins, I had to go back and learn how to design services that delighted end users and delighted our customers, and had to refit those services I had designed from a purely service delivery perspective back to that human-centered focused and that customer-focused perspective. So you hit the nail on the head. It's really about understanding that there's underlying ways that we need to deliver things, and that to me is what enterprise architecture goes such a long way to describing and defining. But it's also understanding that on the front end, to both the fulfillers, being our customers, our team members, but also our customers and our clients, there is a design that needs to take place to understand what they're actually expecting of us. And in that delightful space, which Lexi and I have learned a few times, you're often surprised by what you find when you come at it from a process or an architecture perspective. You think you're going to get certain answers, but then when you ask the end users of that service what they're actually looking for, it starts to get weird and wonderful. What do you think about that, Alexi?
Well, I think you pretty covered it. It does resonate. I think just to build on and just like Stuart about what it is and what it isn't, I think I got to experience service design coming from an architecture perspective. And a good way I look at it is architecture and service design is more like the art and science. So architecture is very logical. You look at your problem, you break it down into smaller parts. You can connect technology with information flow, with your business process, and so on. What service design brings is really you start with the empathy, you start from customers, and you work your way back from this. So I think for me, it's a good combination as long as you get the right blends.
Mm.
So like, can I give an example?
Yes, yeah.
So I was just thinking of an example of like a typical maybe service design project that might have nothing to do with technology, right? That you might, if you were a service designer, you might get asked to work on. So and I kind of thought about this as a customer of this place I'm going to describe in a minute, and you could imagine that a service designer could have worked on it, or maybe the owner just had a great business idea. So that you could imagine a service designer might be given a brief for something like, how might we in the CBD, in the sort of in the business district, create a differentiating lunch experience for our kind of our city clientele, so that we stand above the competition, and we've noticed, the problem might be something like, we've noticed that our customers are kind of queues are through the door. We're not, customers are dropping off, and we're not seeing customers return. How do we drive re-engagement back with our customers? How do we do that? So the service designer might come along, and they'll probably stand in a queue, and they'll just pretend to be a customer, and they'll experience what it's like, and they'll be listening to what other people are talking about, and then they'll probably go and wander around a little bit, keep coming back. Do they get the same experience every time? And then they might go, well, actually, we've got this insight that people are a little bit agitated and frustrated. They can smell the food, but they can't taste the food. They're waiting in the queue too long, and they don't like queuing. That's the insight. They just don't like queuing. So the service designer might look into then sort of human psychology and sort of techniques around that, and kind of come up with an insight. Well, what if we just gave people, this happens to be a falafel restaurant, right? And I was delighted as a customer when I went to this restaurant for the first time, because I'm in the queue, and they've got effectively someone coming round with falafel that you can dip into a bowl of hummus and tahini or whatever, and just pop a falafel while you're in the queue. And it just completely changed the mood of the queue, because suddenly you've got somebody to talk to with your colleagues. You forget that you're queuing, so it kind of changes the human perception of the wait time, and it gets you realizing how tasty the food is, and hey, they must have this abundance if they can. This is a high quality product. Not only does it taste delicious and it's healthy, and then suddenly you're at the front of the queue and you're ordering, and it's like, oh, that was actually really good. Maybe I'll go for that option, which happens to be a bit more expensive, and you get upsold on something because you were so delighted by what you've eaten. So the service now, whether that's by design or by happenstance that the business owner just had this good idea, that's the type of problem a service designer might work on. It's going to drive retention, it's going to drive customer delight, and it's going to keep people coming back, and maybe even spending just that little bit more when they're at the queue. So when they're at the till. And so I think service design is an incredibly powerful kind of technique. It typically starts with a design question, or the service designer would reframe the problem as a question to go and research, and then they might, halfway through their research, kind of reframe the problem. And that's really powerful from a technology perspective when you get service designers coming in to work on more strategic technology or transformation programs that an enterprise architecture might be more involved in, because you're starting with the human, you kind of really challenge, like, why are we doing this? And I think that's a really powerful thing that the design discipline brings in general. Like, why are we solving this problem? Who are we solving this problem for? And the enterprise architect is often in receipt of a receipt of something. We've got a strategy to reduce costs, or we've got a strategy to converge technology landscape, or we've got a strategy to kind of make it faster to onboard a new acquisition. How do we do that? Well, if you come at it from the lens of, well, why and who's involved and who are the actors involved, then you can start getting these little nuggets that can help reshape how you think about the question, which in turn then reshapes about what you think is in scope of what you're designing for. So yeah, hopefully that's a little kind of example of maybe service design in action, although I don't know whether service designers design the experience.
I'm curious, like, Alexis, do you have actually some examples about how service design and enterprise architecture work together to achieve some business goals? So I guess Stuart gives us a great example of the service design, but do you have any examples of when they really work together?
Yeah, I think that's probably building on to what Stuart said. I think for me, something I experienced to be very powerful is to tell a good story. A story that is about the customer, and a story that you can easily communicate with the business, with the actual customers, and with technical people. So the example was, I was working for a public organization. First time I experienced this, and they were going through a pretty large modernization program. So a health agency looking at upgrading the operating model, the tech stack, and they already done a lot of design in that space. And they wanted to go to market, to an RFQ, to really get to market, to tell them how they could help them to implement the change. And there was a lot of thinking in place. You had the articulation of the business benefits. You had journey maps all over the agency. You could see the pain points. You had detailed data migration, architecture, operating model. But it was really hard to connect all those bits and pieces onto a story you could tell to the market and get clear response. So re-articulating this in terms of the outcomes. And so my experience with service design was really to turn this around and to frame this from the perspective of the beneficiaries. So in that sense, there was, out there, the community, the GP, the health ecosystem. And then you can map back how those services are going to help support those business outcomes, but also how you translate this onto blueprints for implementation. So the technical side of things. What are the capabilities you need to uplift, change, and next level down? What's the process you need to redefine? The technology you need to upgrade, the information assets you need to wrap up with the right security control, and all that. And it was very powerful to tell the story, to engage the stakeholders. So we had showcases with the executive within the agencies, other agencies. It was a good way to connect all. I mean, there was like 100 people in that project. So to have that line of sight throughout, and really help connect with the implementation, so with the market, and to a way that the implementation roadmap was thought from that lens, the lens of the customer and the services. So I thought that was a really good way to get a lot of different parties together and really speak the same language, to think about the outcomes, the business objective, and how you're going to do it from more of an implementation perspective. Morgen, I'm sure when we cross path, you will have experienced a bit of this as well, that storytelling element.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting when you take a team through, usually the most experience I've had with the enterprise architecture work that certainly I've done with FromHereOn has been with the internal teams that are delivering or fulfilling the services. So be they IT teams or HR teams, or it doesn't really matter, they're the sort of the customer orientated. And you would assume that they would have a pretty good lens of what the experiences are of the customer. And I found that that's not often the case. So you might get a good customer service officer or somebody who's on frontline, maybe tier 1 support, who's used to picking up the phone or reading the feedback emails, and they may have reasonably good visibility of user experience. But it's really in the storytelling, as you say, when we start to actually map it out and show them all of the different interaction points that they have within an organization. And then even internally, how the teams themselves are interacting with one another or interacting with their own technology or their own tools, their own documentation. It's in being able to tell that story. And of course, we're driving to an outcome. Often we're the consultants coming in and we're trying to produce artifacts out the other end, journey maps or blueprints or personas, anything that we're required to produce. But I think the actual magic in the fusion between service design and enterprise architecture is in those stories, and it's in seeing the epiphanies and the pennies drop. And it's one of the joys I get out of facilitating service design workshops. It's where you can see the team members starting to connect that, oh, the customer's got this need, and that's not what I thought that was happening for them at that time. And I'm using this database that's really slow and it sends 8 different email notifications to them. Are they really getting 8 email notifications at this very first step? And as you sort of unpack that and pull that apart, it is in the stories where the magic happens. And I think that fusion is just so powerful. And you can see mentality shift and enthusiasm builds. Yeah, absolutely.
I just might want to quickly acknowledge we have quite a few people joining us and saying hi. Some people joining us on YouTube, Chris saying hi, and we have quite a lot of people join us on LinkedIn. And there's people from UK, Stuart. Some people wake up to to listen. Chris Selden from UK joining us, and people from Paris, a lot of people from Melbourne, of course, and Auckland. I like Sean's comment. I think it was Stuart towards your example about the cafe. Sean is saying it's like putting the mirrors in the lift lobby so people can look at themselves and no longer mind the wait time. great example of the service design. So guys, feel free to also put some questions in the comments. We will have some time to go through a few questions as well. But back to conversation. I guess we talk about few areas where the service design, enterprise architecture can work together. What is some, frictions? Where have you encountered some, friction between service design and enterprise architecture, and how this contradiction can be like managed and resolved? So do you have some good examples?
Yeah.
Stuart, there's nothing. Let's start with Stuart.
Yeah, I kind of want to just maybe I'll answer the question, but I'd like to just also step back and just be really clear about or just reframe an example of an enterprise problem, like that an enterprise architect might be working on where service design is complementary, right? And then we'll go to how it could be contradictory. So we did a project many years ago at a global legal firm, and they were trying to times X their global litigation business, and discovery is a critical part of that, where all the sides kind of dump data and dump documents into a big, to a third party, and then it's kind of can go through discovery. And I was running an enterprise architecture team, and we had effectively to set out the domain strategy for discovery. What's all the technology, the systems, etc. We said, well, let's just bring some service design thinking into this process. How does this work internally? And effectively what started is from a technology perspective, and the enterprise architecture as a technology project, and which was effectively, there was an expectation that we go to RFI, RFP, select a new platform, implement the platform. When we did, we brought the service designer in, and we started running effectively internal ethnography, internal user research with the lawyers, with the solicitors, with the paralegals. This critical insight came out that basically the lawyers that were working for this top global law firm had always been the best in their lives at everything. They'd been top of the classes at schools, they'd been the elite that had gone to the best universities, and they had never failed at anything in their lives. And they joined a law firm, and they were getting paid more than everyone else that they knew, and they were loving their life, and they were working really, really hard, but they never failed. And yet here was a subject that was technical, technology based. You needed to know about metadata. What's metadata? I don't know what this is. studied that before, and they didn't want to be seen to be wrong. And what was happening in the system, in the human system, is that people started behaving in strange ways and not following processes to try and hide and cover up mistakes that they didn't want to be seen to be wrong. So they were making bad decisions, not engaging the right people at the right time. And it wasn't visible because there was a culture of effectively fear in a law firm. You could imagine that there's an expectation to conform. And so the discovery it came from architecture and from technology, from the office of the CTO, but what came out was an insight that, hang on a minute, if we just go to RFP and solve a technology problem, we're going to end up with the same situation we've got today. And that if we're going to try and X times growth, this is going to be a fundamental blocker to it. So as the enterprise architect, bringing from all like kind of, well, what's the business design? What's the culture? What's the right way of organizing ourselves so that we take that fear away and don't punish people for not knowing, but actually create a system where they feel in control and empowered, but at the same time we've got their back so they don't have to look stupid. And so what the program ended up becoming was, yes, it was an RFI and it was an RFP, but the architecture team got the opportunity to also lead a question around, well, how might we redesign a function in the business to re-engage with this problem in this process? So then we started using typical tools like process mapping and kind of understanding the process of these things, but then we were able to start engaging with the business teams to redesign the business function at the same time as the technology, and they help shape it with a community of working groups. So it might sound kind of a little bit like, well, that's common sense, but the fact is it required the people that were trying to design the system to actually go and be curious enough to ask, to discover the insight. So that's, I think, an example of just practically how they work together. So like, how do they contradict each other? So now imagine the same scenario. I was working with another service designer. We were doing it was for a global CTO, and the homework question was, how might we deliver a modern engineering experience? So this is going back about 10 years now. So global CTO wanting to deliver standardized global infrastructure services, but really uplift the developer experience inside a financial services organization. And a service designer came onto the project, and service designers, when they start a process, they ask a question and they like to go really wide with their research. They want to understand the ecosystem, the human factors. Who am I designing for? What are their needs? What are their desires? And the service designer that came onto the project got a bit, in my opinion, so I could be wrong here, but this is just my view. We were trying to understand, like, what's the developer experience? How might a developer be able to work in a secure way, faster, cheaper, better, get access to the resources that they're used to using to, build solutions and deploy solutions faster. And so who was our primary target of our research? Well, the developers and all the people around them, security, etc. So, but this human-centered designer, this service designer, wanted to go and start interviewing customers on the street in the city to understand their experience so that it can inform the developer experience. And I was trying to explain to them, I appreciate that we need to be customer-centric and human-centric, but human-centered is more important than customer-centric. And understanding how a person on the street feels about financial services is not going to inform this specific design problem. You just need to listen as an enterprise architect or somebody that understands how to design technology systems or the needs of this user. It's a complete waste of our time, because what I can tell you we're going to discover is that the customer on the street is going to want simple to use applications that are fast and convenient and using modern design practices, and the engineer will just doesn't really in a way care even what they want, because that's a problem for them to solve when they're doing their work. This is about what's their workbench, how do they show up, what happens when they turn on their computer in the morning. As much as they might like to be thinking about the end customer on the street, and maybe we're going to remind them of that in a stand-up, let's focus our efforts on doing the user research on the actual technologists. So I think there's this mindset of constant curiosity hitting tension with, oh, I've seen this design problem before. There's a known architectural design pattern for this, and there's a corresponding anti-pattern, and we can wheel out our anti-patterns and our design patterns. That's what we do as architects. But from a service design, it's like, there's almost a desire to kind of enter something as if seeing the world for the first time every time you see a problem, and that can cause some tension and conflict from my experience. Like knowing when the expert, or when you've observed something enough times that you can see a pattern and just, we're going to do a shortcut here.
I like when you say tension, Stuart. And I think for
Say
me,
that one more time, Alexis, sir.
I like when you say tension, Stuart, because for me, you've got natural tension between service design and architecture, and it could be healthy tension, but could also be friction if it's not designed the right way. And I like what you said about just enough as well. You need to be pragmatic about what you need for getting the job done. I think where I've seen some other tension that you need to manage is probably around the delivery, the ways of working, so the speed. So if I look at service design, and that's probably something I've seen a lot with organizations that are shifting to new ways of working. So you've got autonomous cross-functional teams around product, platforms, value streams. So trying to go fast. So service design is the way to go. You get proposition. It's all about getting this out quickly, get some feedback, and operate. So speed is important. And then you look at architecture that at time hasn't quite adapted to the new ways of working model. So you got a bit of friction that we see in a few places. One was a financial service institution was really, I think, representative of the issue. So you had architecture to define very comprehensively correct reference architecture that took a long time, and that wasn't quite consumable by the teams. It didn't really talk about the product, the services, the stories they had to build. And then you had quite a heavy governance. So you had hundreds of guardrails that the team had to make sense of. Some were architect written for architects, by architects for architects. And you had layers and layers of governance. So that really created a bit of friction. And like what you said, Stuart, I think the way around this was to go through a service design process. So the architects working with the engineers as the customer, the product owner, the delivery people, to trying to work out what was the sweet spot, where architecture could actually provide the right value and how can we get things faster. So in that case, was really to reorient how architecture could engage. So moving away from reference architecture to just enough architecture that is more at the product architecture level and next level up. And from a governance perspective, was really to set up something that could provide controlled experimentation. So help the teams to self-served, get guardrails that make sense. If it's not risky, then go ahead and run with it. If there's a higher level of risk, maybe get an architect to help you, coach you, go through deviation by exception, and really just get on with it. So that speed, I think it's something that I see a lot of tension and could be healthy if you set up the right control environments. And the other thing related I've seen is all with speed comes also the flexibility. So with service design, get some stuff quickly out and then get the learning, test, learn, and adapt. And so from a planning perspective, it can feel a bit tactical. So if you start looking at the roadmap, you got things defined for next 3 months. But then it start getting a bit open because you just don't know, which is very different from where you could have seen architecture where you got well-defined roadmap for next 3 years, and you need to take into consideration risk, technical debt, and so on. So the way we found to go around this same thing again, service design between the architects and the engineers and the whole community. And what's been a key learning is really trying to make it more dynamic. So get all the community to align around the same objective, high level customer outcomes, business objective, to a level that people can start to pull this and work out the work to be done. But where that usually fails, is that feedback loop. So once you've done your daily cadence, it's really easy to lose that connection. So creating the time for the architects, the service designer, the team to understand what has been done, what sort of technical debt we've got, what have we learned that we might want to feedback to the architecture. Are we still heading to the right on the right track, at the right speed? Do we need to recalibrate? So having that sort of constant feedback loop, that's been a very important thing I found to sort of create that healthy tension between architecture, providing the long-term planning, make sure that you stay on the right direction, and getting the team the sort of autonomy to get on with it. What do you think, Morgen, in terms of speed and flexibility on the other side of the fence? Again, this from a service design perspective.
Well, as you know, I'm a bit of a weird service designer because I have more of a technical background that gives me probably some more insight, and that's probably the observation that I'd make, that where it works so beautifully well. I think service designers, when they are willing to be willing to step into more of a discipline space. They're willing to potentially document things in a more detailed way. They're willing to talk to architects about their formats, their blueprints, their metadata, their concepts, and understand that all the way through service design, you're gathering material that will be incredibly useful to architecture, to blueprints, and so on. And not just throwing that in the post-it notes going in the bin at the end of the workshop, having that cross-pollination between both practices throughout the delivery. And that's obviously benefits the customer, because the customer knows that as a team, you're hearing everything and you're processing everything together. But I do think service designers need to have that little bit more discipline, those ways of working, potentially working in with, we've worked in design sprints together before, where we've set goals together, we've set outcomes together, we've agreed on deliverables, we've agreed on formats, we've agreed on everything down to color coding and the terminology. And the same from the enterprise architecture perspective, the willingness to get a little bit fluffy sometimes, to do some warm-up activities at the beginning of the workshop to break down some barriers between participants. And I think the closer that we get together whilst respecting the individual disciplines, the better outcomes you get. So my takeaways from where they overlap is, it's a bit like a relay race to me. I've frequently been at the front end with service design when we're describing, we understand the problem statement, we understand the expectations of what we're there to deliver as a consultant potentially, but we're not really lining up with the architecture activities, and we're not really clear what the architecture deliverables are. So they go off and start, looking up existing solution architecture. They talk to the solution architects, they open up things, they look at logs, they get reports, they do things. They don't talk to the people that I'm talking to. And vice versa. I'm talking to people who may not understand the detail of the systems they're using. They might, classify a whole suite of products as one name, and it's actually more granular than that. And it's quite important that we know that, because those are the underlying systems that are delivering the services. So it's in that tension of making sure that when you have it, you're capturing the detail at a service design level, but it's like a relay race. You have to be working with architecture right through design, so that you are handing things over in a way that's consistent, and that you aren't making commitments, or you aren't describing possible solutions or ideas without that turning into something that manifests in the blueprints or in other artifacts that EAs are producing. So it's definitely, in summary, I think it's definitely in both disciplines, recognizing that there's strengths within the others, and to coming together and focusing on the shared terminologies and the shared tools and the shared ways of working, and having those conversations up front. I think you get to the outcomes a lot better.
We have a lot of comments coming in on LinkedIn. I just want to acknowledge quickly. Thank you, everyone. And if we don't answer your question during the stream, please don't get discouraged. We see your questions in the comments, and we'll make sure we'll write some answers offline as well. And I think you guys already kind of, as you're discussing, already answering those questions. Where the question about the conflict and how to resolve that friction between service design and architecture. Matthew, have a question that you guys kind of partly covered as well. Once you accept the combination of service design and enterprise architecture is valuable capability, and I'm sold on this already, what are your thoughts on how this is implemented? If you already have a service design team, should you combine them with enterprise architecture team, or should you add service design competency in your EA team while retaining other service design competencies centered elsewhere in organization? So it's a long question. Anyone wanna give some thought? Yes, Alexis?
All right, I'll give it a crack. So I think I would see service design as a discipline as well as a role. So I think as a discipline, it's important that it's something that people feel comfortable with. So if you look at architects, you don't have to be a service designer, but you need to understand the importance of empathy, the journey maps, and how you can connect things across. And I think it becomes very powerful then to partner up with a service designer, if it's coming from a chapter, a service of excellence, to be able to complement the skill sets. So I think you need to look at this as a skill and a discipline, and then obviously lean on to the expert to help you on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would add to that service design is a discipline. There is a set of skills and techniques and tools that you should use in the exact same way there is for enterprise architecture. And I would think having an awareness as an organization that those are skills and disciplines that need training, that need experience, that need support. But what I would say, even at a practical level, I wouldn't necessarily expect those teams to fuse, but I would certainly expect some cross-pollination between them. So we, as a great example, on one of the recent engagements I actually did with FromHereOn, we had an enterprise architecture resource sitting in on our service design workshops. And just listening to the conversation, understanding we were building out journey maps at the time, understanding how we were gathering some of the details and the questions that we were asking, and they were able to interject some more detailed questions at different points or steer conversations in a slightly different way because they had context that I didn't have as the service designer that they'd gathered from some enterprise architecture activities. So obviously without joining everybody at the hip, I think that communication and cross-pollination is really necessary, but also making sure that you shouldn't expect an enterprise architect to facilitate a service design workshop, and you shouldn't expect a service designer to, build a detailed blueprint, as an example, or a roadmap, or some other artifact. What do you think, Stuart?
Yeah, I agree that I think that putting them in the same team isn't the right thing to do, because I think that there's the core of the disciplines are so distinct and discrete that you'd want to kind of nurture people from a development perspective in a slightly different way. However, I've experienced training architects in design thinking and systems thinking, and really running that as a structured program of training. And I think that that's a good way to kind of start getting people's minds opened up to kind of different ways of thinking, because ultimately people want to solve and design the right problems. And so these are just techniques and kind of methodologies and ways of thinking that allow you as a team to open yourself up to the possibility of potentially working differently. I think, like any teaming that happens in an organization, taking the time to actually understand where everyone's coming from, where everyone's at, and how they think, how they talk, the language they use is so important. So, I mean, practical example, I think we were doing a program that was about like 15 service designers, or 10 service designers and 10 architects. We had to get them to basically pod off and coach different product teams. We spent 2 full days in an immersive experience that we kind of tried to bring a human-centered design to approach, and it just getting stumped on jargon. The jargon of a service designer, the language of service design versus the language of architecture. Like, how do we talk? What do we mean when we say things? What's my design process? And just listening, I think, if I had the challenge of saying, right, I'm going to bring these two teams together, I'd take them away for half a day and ask them to present to each other their design philosophy. Fundamentally, a service design, an architecture practice is trying to understand, where are we at today? So what's our vision? Where are we at today? Where's our target? What's our gaps? What's the dependencies and the impacts, right? So you can have an architecture process. Well, a service design process starts with, it's not too dissimilar, but it iterates faster through it. It's like, what's not, where do we want to be? Like, because that vision might be wrong, but it may be right, but like, we're questioning whether it's even right. So what are we trying to do? Quickly iterate and get all of this information to understand the current state, map a potential future state, potentially reframe the why, and then go again. And just looking at the tech, we did an activity where we had everyone mapped out their toolbox of all the activities they had. Whether it's, as a service designer, I might use a time travel activity, or a empathy mapping activity, or a service blueprinting. We got the architects to do the same. What's in my toolbox? How am I going to analyze things? And we put a generic design process up on the wall, and then got people to plot where they're using their tools and techniques at different points in time, just to understand how different they are in terms of the methodology, but fundamentally everyone's trying to understand the same thing. Like, where am I today? Where are we trying to get to? And then, so long as people kind of co-join on and kind of team out that actually the purpose of working together is to get to a better outcome, a better use of investment, a better, better outcome for the customer and the business, and are prepared to kind of accept and indulge each other in, like, okay, you're going to do this. So I think the other thing we did, sorry, I'm just reflecting back, we had like even just like an agreement that was set up at the front, like, as the service designer, I'm going to go and do this thing, and I can see that it might input into this thing that you're doing. And as the architect, I'm going to do this activity, like current state application mapping or something. And I might discover a type of system user that you didn't even know about when we were mapping the landscape. So, and just trying to coordinate and just visually map out your design processes, that's where I'd start. And you'd be fascinated. If you come with a mindset of a beginner's mind of, you're clearly doing something valuable, but I don't quite know exactly what it is you're doing, but I want to listen and learn. That's the mindset that the service designer will say, oh, I get you. Like, at least you're demonstrating to me that you understand me, because that's how I think all the time when I'm approaching my projects. So I think that is at the core of it. It's a mindset thing. Is the architect too rigid in their mindset in a way that the service designer almost doesn't want to let them in, because they're concerned that they're not prepared to kind of open themselves up to all of the possibilities that they might be prepared to find on their journey. So a bit of a...
You've said two things that really resonated with me. Firstly, the jargon. So I think service designers and enterprise architects can be easily accused of using too much jargon. And we all have to be sensitive about that when we're with customers or with teams that aren't familiar with those terms. But the second thing you said, which and I diluting that, and the quicker you can standardize that language, and you're talking journey map, I'm talking process map, you're talking value stream map, they're not the same thing. So let's actually do what the second thing that you said that caught my attention, which is, it's like a show and share at kindergarten. You literally pull a canvas out or a blueprint out or a document out or a Visio diagram out or a printout, or open a Miro board for me. Show me what it is that you're producing or you're gathering. Show me the tools that you're using and what it is that you're intending to document. Because exactly as you said, so many times we've delighted customers because they have appreciated that they've just talked, they've shown us things, however we were doing that as a service designer, whether it was in a workshop format, whether it was sitting, desktop observations, whatever it was, when they know that we heard them, but both as service designers and as architects, and that however we got that information, it coalesced, and it ended up in the right artifact at the right level of detail for the right point in the story. That's when it's made a lot of sense. And I think my experience is exactly the same, Stuart. I think I've been in many situations where we were almost a bit reluctant to look at each other's tools and look at each other's deliverables and literally show each other what we were producing or what we were working on, for fear that it might be too high or too low or too fluffy or too technical. But that would probably be my core recommendation: is get rid of some of the jargon by showing each team members, have a bit of a discussion around what tools you'll be using and why, and then work out how they connect together, where the gaps are in between what you're using and what the other team are using, and to see if there's a simple register or a parking lot or another tool or canvas that you can use to gather the things that are in between. So that relay race actually works a lot better.
I just want to bring the question from Lisa. Sorry, Alexis, I'm just... It's kind of on the same topic, but maybe you can, bring your answer and also answer Lisa's question. I think it's quite interesting to mention it. And Lisa woke up at 6 a.m. today because she's in UK, and
hey, Lisa.
Really wanted to listen to Stuart. Lisa just mentioning, enterprise architecture community often talk about how difficult it is to be accepted into transformation program, and for the expertise to be integrated. I'm hearing in design community having the same challenges. Do we all have more to do to integrate our shared outcomes and thinking into delivery teams? And do product managers and program managers to see the complementary services into the plans?
I'll take a quick first pass at that one and pass that one over. through the iteration of my career, I ended up actually stepping into product management because I think that fusion and that understanding of that role in an organization is quite immature. And I too have experienced that as a designer, as a developer, as an operational leader, as lots of different roles. So trying to define that and explain its value is really critical. So I'll pass to Stuart though, because I know that's something that I mean, we're convinced we know the benefits of it, but helping organizations understand the role of that is really critical too.
Alexis, what?
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Go for it, Stuart.
I was going to say, it's a really good question, Lisa. And it's like, I guess, a question of, I think in general, Alexis described that service design is a role and a discipline. The same was true with architecture, but you got to look at who are the people, to Morgan's point, who are the people that are actually taking the fundamental decisions in the organization around it. And modern ways of working in the kind of becoming pervasive, whether it's in the product owner role, the product manager role, is ultimately the intersection between some of these things, because it's for them to determine, well, they're going to set the vision, they're going to want to go off and kind of prioritize what and how things get done in a way. So I think that there's a really kind of, it's very easy if you work in a consultancy, because you get brought in an agency model where somebody sort of sold a project with these type of capabilities embedded in the pod. But in an organization, when you're kind of, I guess, sitting in your own function, looking at where the influence is and where the centers of gravities are in terms of getting the outcomes that you need to deliver as a function, it requires almost reflection on some of those softer skills about how am I going to maybe kind of start aligning with those product teams a bit better. Maybe that requires the architecture function to reimagine how it's organized and how it kind of partners into product teams. But if the primary delivery unit of value is a product or a service team in an organization, then the architect and the service line should be sort of saying, well, how do I get myself embedded into that structure, rather than being a sort of an island on its own? Because otherwise you're not designing something that is working on a problem that's, where the investment's at. So I don't really have an answer, but I think maybe the answer is for service designers and enterprise architects to kind of rebadge themselves, rebadge their role, but keep their skills in their toolbox.
One thing I would say though that you touched on is critical is too often I see service designers go off and geek out about design activities and their discipline, and I think EAs can be accused of doing the same. At the end of the day, we're in service of a problem, and we have to get engagement and buy-in at a strategic level usually, or a leadership level usually. So making our outputs and our discoveries and our deliverables consumable has to be shared. And I think there's a lot of good overlap, because I've seen copious amounts of detailed blueprints that nobody at a leadership level actually sits down and looks at and reflects on. How do you bubble that up to the key takeaways? Same thing from a service design perspective. You've got to work out how to summarize that. And if you can do that collectively, you give leadership that confidence that you've got the human-centered design aspects of it, but also the technical detail, the strategy, the roadmaps, the underlying infrastructure requirements. And I think that's the responsibility of both teams.
And I think that's the theme that, as we touched on quite a bit, is the collaboration model between those different communities. And I don't think it's a one size fits all. Obviously, it needs to fit with the maturity of where you are across the teams as a product owner, the life cycle where you are with your services as well. So, you mentioned about service design to design the right level of interaction. In my experience is also, if you look at architects, where does it make sense to bring them in? If you look at the memo for next quarter, it could be a great way to help the product owner to understand what's feasible, what are the dependencies across the other services. So I think there's a bit of experimentation. It's not a one size fits all, but experiment. I think that's probably the key thing, and things will change as you go.
And we're totally running out of time. I feel like we can talk and talk and talk, and we just, we only touch the tip of the iceberg here. But I think just maybe the really quick last question. And Alexis, if you can answer it in 1 minute, that will be like impressive. Okay. So can you give me 1 minute answer on the starting point? Like if we think about everything we just talked, and if you give some quick advice to organization, like where should the organization begin when blending service design and enterprise architecture? So, what would be the top advice to finish this stream?
All right, timing starts now. So I'll say just look for some quick wins. Go with a pilot. Start small, think big. So look at a real problem. You got some friendlies. You got some sponsorship. Look at a thin slice in the organization, so something that you can easily solve. And look at friendlies across the different communities, so you can come together as a partnership, and then you can showcase, demonstrate the benefit, and look at how you scale up. But don't try to buy too much just to get started. It's a change management.
Yeah, definitely. And before we're saying any bye, I quickly, while we have 3 minutes left, and thank you so much everyone for your comments. Like if we didn't answer your question live, we definitely take some questions offline and answer in the comments. But before everyone go, I just quickly want to make the announcement for our next topic. Our next event is scheduled for the 5th of December, and the topic is Women in Enterprise Architecture, First Perspective on Dynamic Career. So please join us for inspiring panel discussion with accomplished women in enterprise architecture who will share their career stories, invaluable insights, and perspective on the future of this evolving field. And of course, I encourage you to get notified, not only follow us on LinkedIn, but join our meetup group. We actually have a meetup groups in all the countries. So we have a meetup group in Australia, New Zealand, and UK. So try to join the meetup group in your country, because we also, as I mentioned, going to have some face-to-face events. The face-to-face events coming up in Sydney and Melbourne in December. So please stay tuned. So obviously encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to YouTube channel, depending on your preferred platform for consuming information. And also thank you for our co-sponsors, AI Learning. If you're in the journey of, discovering enterprise architecture and other fields, and if you're watching the stream, you have an opportunity to receive 20% off of the standard price of all public instructor-led classes and self-paced e-learning courses. You can see promo code on the screen. Yes, so you can grab a screenshot, but I'll also put the link in the comment. And 1 minute to go. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me tonight. I know I have to just stop the discussion and this a little bit abruptly, because we're running out of time, but I'm sure a lot of people will reach out and ask more questions. And guys, you can see everyone's names on LinkedIn. I'm sure everyone will be happy to connect and answer any further questions. Again, thank you so much, Stuart, Morgen, Alexis. So many insights and so many comments today. And I'll see you in some future discussions.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Make sure to like this video, share, and all these things. You all guys know what to do. I don't need to repeat you. And it's healthy for you, like pressing the like button and burn the calorie as well. So see you on the 5th of December.